Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're taking a close look at one specific YouTube video. It's called "Can 2 Billion Muslims Dismantle Israel?" from the CJ Werleman Show. And our goal, like always, is really to explore the claims and arguments inside this source. We want to help you understand the specific perspectives, the events the speaker is highlighting. Think of it as a direct window into what this video asserts.
Yeah.
And just a reminder up front, we're analyzing what the source claims. We're not here to agree or disagree, just to unpack it for you.
Absolutely. And, what's striking is how quickly the source lays out its main point.
Yes.
It basically argues that 2 billion Muslims are uniting, coming together as one ummah, that's the term for the whole Muslim community, and becoming this unified force against Israel.
Okay. A unified force.
Yeah. And so this deep dive, we'll be looking at the evidence, the arguments the speaker actually uses to back up that pretty big claim.
Right.
We'll see how different global events get woven into that narrative.
Got it. Okay, so let's start with that core idea. 2 billion Muslims rising up together. What examples does the source give right off the bat?
Well, the video immediately points to widespread protests
Yeah.
across the Muslim world.
Okay.
It mentions huge demonstrations, specifically in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Turkey, apparently happening over just one weekend.
Huge how? Any numbers?
Yeah, the scale mentioned is pretty significant. It says over 100,000 protesters were out in Dhaka, Bangladesh, just on one Saturday.
Wow. Okay. 100,000 in one city.
Hmm.
And what were they saying? What were the chants, according to this source?
The chants and details are very direct. Things like stop Israeli aggression, boycott Israeli products, and also free Palestine from the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea? Okay.
And the source claims these protests were largely sparked by senior Islamic scholars.
How so?
They apparently issued a fatwa, a formal religious ruling demanding military action from Muslim-majority countries. The goal stated was to save Gaza from genocide.
Right. A fatwa calling for military action.
Exactly. And then the video sort of connects the dots, concluding that seeing Muslims marching in Dhaka, Istanbul, Lahore, well, it says that's tantamount to 2 billion Muslims answering that call.
Okay, so it draws a direct line from the fatwa to the street protests.
Yeah.
So why now? What does the source say is driving this rise of the ummah, as it calls it? What's behind the frustration it describes?
Well, the video's argument is pretty clear on that. It says Muslims are just tired of waiting for their political leaders to do something.
Right, impatience.
Yeah, and it explicitly claims Arab leaders are rightly, that's the word used, rightly accused of being Zionist puppets.
Puppets. That's a strong language.
Very. It even cites examples like protesters throwing shoes at pictures of Netanyahu and Trump as, a symbol of this deep anger.
Okay. Any specific countries mentioned in relation to this frustration?
It highlights Bangladesh again. It says the new government there renewed the Accept Israel clause in passports, banning citizens from visiting Israel. The source describes this as the whole country being united behind boycotting Israel. It even mentions a quote from a supposed 9-year-old in Dhaka, expressing this idea perfectly.
A 9-year-old?
Huh?
Huh. What about Pakistan? You mentioned protests there, too. The source talked about millions participating.
Exactly. That video goes into detail there. It says millions of Pakistanis joined a nationwide rally for Palestine.
And what were their demands?
They were demanding their government do more about Gaza, calling on the U.S. to enforce an immediate ceasefire and pushing for a global boycott of Israeli products.
So, again, pressure on their own government and on the U.S.
Right. And the source claims Pakistanis see their own government as corrupt and nefarious, a puppet of the United States.
Okay.
Which, according to the video, explains why they're rallying behind religious leaders instead of the political ones.
And that focus on religious leadership, that brings us to something pretty critical in the source's narrative, doesn't it? The mention of jihad.
Yes, absolutely. That's a key point the source makes. It states flat out that Pakistan's Grand Mufti, a top Islamic legal authority, declared jihad against Israel.
Declared jihad.
And the video claims that the very next day, millions of Pakistani civilians accepted that declaration.
Millions accepting a call for jihad.
That's the claim. And it goes further. It asserts this call for jihad against Israel wasn't just in Pakistan. It says the International Union of Islamic Scholars made the same call.
Okay.
along with top clerics in Turkey, Syria, Tunisia, Jordan, and Indonesia.
So a coordinated call from religious figures across several countries.
That's what the source presents.
Yeah.
And it says this call was definitely heard, pointing to hundreds of thousands of Turks taking to the streets.
What were they chanting in Turkey?
Chants like, Gaza's dying, stand up.
Yeah.
God is great, which the source connects directly to solidarity with this global fatwa.
Mm-hmm.
It also mentions protests outside Trump Tower in Istanbul, specifically denouncing U.S. support for what the video calls the ongoing Israeli genocide against Palestinians.
Okay, so we've got the protests, the frustration with leaders, the religious calls to action, including jihad. Now, the video also seems to get quite critical of specific political leaders. How does it frame their role in all this?
Yeah, it really doesn't hold back. The speaker claims, and I'm quoting here, that the Muslim world remains weak, insipid, and timid due to the corrupting influence of Arab Zionists who rule over the Middle East.
Arab Zionists. Who specifically does it name?
It names leaders like MBZ, MBS, and Sisi. So the rulers of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt,
Right.
claiming they quietly support the Israeli regime and that they hide behind government-sponsored religious leaders to basically stop any real action.
Hide behind them. How?
Well, it gives the example of Egypt's Grand Mufti. He reportedly rejected that global fatwa we talked about, calling it irresponsible.
Ah, I see. So using religious figures to counter other religious calls?
That's the argument. The source calls this moral cowardice and claims it's what allows Israel to get away with herding Palestinians to their deaths.
That is a very strong accusation. So, if the source is so critical of these leaders, where does it say the real power lies? How does this movement supposedly gain strength, if not through politics?
That's really central to the video's message. It hammers home the claim that 2 billion Muslims are now taking matters into their own hands.
Taking matters into their own hands.
Yeah. It says they're done hoping and waiting for political or military action. Instead, they're locking arms and putting aside sectarian and ethnic divisions to deliver Israel a devastating gut punch.
Okay, so it's emphasizing this unified grassroots power, acting outside of or even against the established political structures.
Exactly. That's the core narrative. A self-reliant, unified ummah.
Now, beyond the protests and the religious calls, the source also talks about economic actions, right? What about the boycott movement it mentions?
Yes, the economic pressure is another pillar of the argument. The video talks quite a bit about boycott movements. It specifically highlights India.
India? What's happening there, according to the source?
It focuses on Muslim women in Delhi, who apparently launched a campaign encouraging Indians to boycott companies that support Israel.
Which companies? Does it name names?
It does. It lists companies mentioned in their campaign materials: Coca-Cola, Starbucks, McDonald's, and Domino's Pizza.
Okay, big global brands.
Right. And it even quotes directly from one of their handouts, which apparently declared, in using these products, you are literally drinking the blood of Palestinian children.
Wow. That's incredibly visceral language.
Extremely.
And what kind of impact does the source claim these boycotts are actually having? Does it say they're working?
It claims they're making a huge difference. It asserts that McDonald's and Starbucks, for example, are reportedly seeing a record decline in sales.
A record decline due to these boycotts.
That's the assertion, linked to the movement's popularity, especially in the Muslim world. The source even suggests these boycotts are forcing the companies to change their policies and become more favorable towards Palestine.
Right. Okay. Now, you mentioned India. The video seems to pivot there, introducing a sort of broader context, talking about an alleged alliance. What does it say about India's Muslims and the Modi regime?
Yet this is a really significant section of the video. It starts expressing new concerns for the Muslim population in India, which it numbers at 200 million.
Concerns about what specifically?
It says the Modi regime continues to chip away at the rights of religious minorities. It focuses on a recently proposed Waqf amendment bill.
Waqf? What's that?
It relates to Muslim religious endowments, properties. The video calls this bill nothing more than a cynical ploy by Hindu nationalist forces to steal land and property from Muslims.
Steal land and property. That's a serious charge.
It is, and it gets darker. The source claims even more sinisterly that the bill gives protection to Hindu extremists.
Protection for what?
Protection for extremists who, the source claims, have vowed to destroy and demolish 35,000 mosques and Islamic shrines in India and Kashmir.
35,000. That's a staggering number. And what does the source say happens when people protest this proposed law?
It recounts that when Muslims protested peacefully across India, they were reportedly attacked by Hindu mobs and also shot and killed by government security forces.
Attacked and killed for protesting.
That's the claim. It also gives other examples like actions against Islamic education. It says 170 Islamic schools or madrasas were shut down in one Indian state.
Shut down?
Yes, with promises to close another 500. And in the state of Assam, it claims the Indian government is demolishing thousands of Muslim-owned homes, leaving potentially upwards of 10 million people vulnerable.
10 million vulnerable. So how does the source tie all of this back to its main argument about Israel and the ummah? It seems like it's drawing a very specific connection here.
It absolutely is. It makes the connection explicit. The video states directly that these actions in India are a direct result of the Hindutva-Zionist alliance.
Hindutva-Zionist alliance. Explain that.
Hindutva refers to a Hindu nationalist ideology. So the source is positing an ideological link, an alliance between that and Zionism.
Okay.
And it claims, quote, genocide against Muslims has never been more in vogue.
More in vogue. Wow.
Yeah. It concludes this part by asserting that these two cancerous ideologies, referring to Hindutva and Zionism, are responsible for the two largest humanitarian crises on the planet.
And the solution, according to the source,
that the 2 billion Muslims will stop them through their collective economic, diplomatic, and political power.
So it brings it right back to that idea of collective Muslim power as the counterforce.
Exactly. It's not just presenting these events in India as isolated incidents. It's weaving them into this larger geopolitical theory, using this claimed Hindutva-Zionist alliance as a kind of unifying framework for everything it's discussed.
Okay, so recapping this for you, the listener, we've really covered a lot of ground here, exploring the range of claims in this specific video source. Everything from those massive protests and calls for military action, the fatwas, the intense criticism of certain Arab leaders.
Right, through to the economic boycotts, especially focusing on those examples like McDonald's and Starbucks.
And then those very specific and quite alarming arguments about the situation for Muslims in India, framed within this asserted Hindutva-Zionist alliance.
And throughout this, we've aimed to give you that direct window into the narrative, the specific arguments, the asserted facts, as presented by the CJ Werleman Show in this particular video.
Exactly. Understanding how the source connects these different global events and actions.
Yeah.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. Consider the kind of power that this source attributes to collective action, to these shifts in global sentiment it describes. What does it really mean when sources, like this one, claim that large, diverse populations are deciding to take matters into their own hands, to try and exert influence on global events outside of traditional politics?
It's definitely a provocative question.
It is something to think about as you continue to navigate all the information out there about these complex global issues.